morning. Does it still count as morning? I guess so. Thank you very much for coming to this talk. Also, if you listen to this, thanks very much to the organizers from Devpod UK. This talk was initially not on the schedule, but there was some cancellation and they asked me to backfill that slot, and I gladly accepted. So thanks for giving me that chance, and also thank you for coming, because I think this one was kind of edited and advertised fairly late. Now, we're going to talk about, well, I'm going to talk about container-based IDEs. And with the we, of course, I will definitely invite you to feel free to ask questions anytime when they come up. I'm not a big fan of waiting and putting them all to the end. So whenever you think something is not right or something is not clear, feel free to let me know. Also, we're a fairly small group, so this should all be fine. Now, a few words about myself. That's me. My name is Matthias. I'm from Stuttgart in Germany. We actually have a public holiday today, so I'm working while all my family is has a day off. If you want to connect with me outside of this talk, I use LinkedIn mostly. I still use Twitter, even though it's kind of fading away a little bit. My role at Novatec is called Chief Technologist. What that really means is I work a lot with new different technologies in the cloud-native soft development space. And a lot of the things also that I do originate out of my teaching activities. So I teach at two universities in the area of Stuttgart for distributed systems and modern software architecture. And this is also kind of the reason how I got to this talk. So in an area of a distributed environment, and this is not only in university, of course, this is also what we see very often in our real-world scenarios, we normally have a kind of a polyglot setup. So opposed to traditional development, where everything was running on one big application server, which kind of set the standard for the language and the version and everything. Now, a lot of things are different, moving parts, different frameworks, different languages, and so on. Very often also combined with container technology and potentially Kubernetes to tie that all together. Now, this is also what I try to tell my students. Okay, so we build sample applications, make sure we have like a clean communication, clean API between the things. And then I say, okay, we build a minor application where I have a main app that performs some tasks. I define an API, and I need to write a front end for that can communicate with it. And what I then do is say, okay, we're trying to build the same thing in different languages, just to make sure the API stays consistent and basically the front end and back end parts are interchangeable. So they get an understanding that of how clean API communication works, and also what it takes to set up things with different programming languages, what like the requirements are, how difficult it might be to containerize all the things, and get this kind of polyglot touch to it. As I said, yeah, I ask for containers, potentially a Docker Compose file that I can easily stand it up and run it, and then put everything into a Git repo so that for an easy access. What I normally hate if they send me emails with long exception stack traces where I don't have an idea what they're actually talking about. So if I can access the repo and reproduce the things, it's easiest for me. And this is also, of course, the same in a real-world scenario. Now, of course, we have problems and issues on that learning path, same as you have in normal projects. So there's, of course, always new programming skill required, container skill required, sometimes going down on the OS level, remote debugging, especially in distributed system case, and the time spent setting up a local environment. So, question, what do you think takes the most time to solve? Or let's say the most unnecessary time to solve. Remote debugging not counts as well, but not normally. This is easier than another one. Exactly. It's because lots of the students have different hardware setups, have different operating system setups, and then even if they don't do polyglot, just take it down to Java. They have different JREs, or they have no JRE at all, and have misconfigurations there. And very often, we never really get to those kind of problems because we're already getting stuck there. And this is kind of sad because the semester has only a limited amount of time, and often we're not really getting to where we want. I mean, it's the same thing when you have a development team and onboard new members. They spend time setting up their local IDEs, get the configuration right, and very often it's still difficult to have all the members to have a consistent setup. And if they don't have consistent setups, they have like different kind of ways to build things and test things, and that will eventually run into problems. So having a standardized shared setup very often helps, and containers are a helpful means to do that. So that's why, yeah, this is kind of how things look. So the clients or students need to connect to an IDE, somehow to a Git repo, to a container hub, and get things running. And in the past, most of the things had to be set up, as I said, with everyone's own responsibility. Now, in the last years, these things changed with these technologies of Gitpod and Codespaces arriving. And this is what I want to show today a little bit, because with those, you kind of move the setup or the runtime, even the runtime of your IDE to somewhere in the cloud. So you can predefine your setup, what kind of versions of build tools, test tools, container tools, whatever is installed. And then you have like a polyglot development environment for different kind of things. That's the one thing. The other one goes into the direction that you just said with the remote debugging. I mean, if the people run their stuff on their machine, there is not much remote debugging. That means mostly I have to sit next to them and we try to figure out things together. If they run the stuff in the cloud, they can easily expose all the things via ports on the internet, and everyone, like other students, myself, can look into that and move things forward a lot faster. In addition to that, yeah, those tools also provide container support. So sometimes students come with machines from companies that have limited admin rights. They're not able to set up, for example, a container daemon and things like that. So these are always unnecessary things. Those tools have a Docker environment provided. So yeah, even see myself now with this ARM-based notebook, which kind of caused some issues with running Docker. This is something I don't have if I use environments like that. So to get started, things are basically free. Both Gitpod and Codespaces provide a certain amount of free hours that you can use. I think both of them are around 40 hours or something, or 80 hours in a month. So it's probably not enough to do like a full-time development job. But if you just like want to play around with some things every now and then and need an environment to get started, it's certainly enough. I mean, I have never reached those limits, and I use it quite a fair bit. So yeah, these are the things we're going to talk about. So who in here has already worked with Codespaces? Okay. Who has been working with Gitpod? One. Has anyone worked with Devpod? Okay, so I hopefully can show you a few new things. I mean, the concepts are kind of identical, but there's still some little differences, and I try to show you what is all possible with that. Let's start with GitHub first, and if my internet works all well, I will try to do all the things live. Yesterday I had another demo and the internet disconnected. This was a bit painful. So just to show you, I'm going to start with a clean sheet. So I say this is going to be DevFox UK. That should be still available. And add a README, create the repo. So I have a blank repo here. And if you look into your GitHub profile, you probably will not have this button, this Gitpod open. This is like a browser extension that I added. I'm going to show that later. But what you probably have is this one. So this is how you normally get your URL, basically to clone your code locally. But you also have this Codespaces tab. Everyone has that. And as this has just been created, of course, there can't be any Codespace associated with that. So I'm going to click on this. Excuse me. And this is going to fire up this environment. So by default, it starts with a web-based Visual Studio Code. It says opening remote. It's probably going to take a few seconds because it has to initialize that container. And now it's saying, welcome to Codespaces. You're on the default image. That means it includes runtimes and tools for Python, Node.js, Docker, and more. As I don't have any code in there yet, normally there's a bit of AI involved, and say if I point this to a repo where I have a certain code base, it will try to install those tools which are potentially required. Now that I don't have anything, it can't know it. So if I look in there now and say Java minus version, it will tell me, okay, this is running on OpenJDK 21, so fairly recent. Everything fine. And I also have, like, I can say Docker PS, there are no containers running, but I can get started straight away. And just, yeah, a reminder, this is not running anywhere on my machine. This is all kind of in the cloud. So to show you that, I can say, I'm going to doing a quick Spring demo. So most of you are probably familiar with the Spring initializer. If you ever heard one of Josh Long's talk, you probably are. Okay. I think I know what it is. You can also access that Spring initializer not only through the web page, but via curl. So I'm going to build a project real quick and say I'm going to allow copy and paste. So these are the things that you have to do when you do that the first time. I'm going to say this is uses a web actuator minus D Java version should be 21. And I would like to have this as a Maven project. So this is all fine. And then I'm going to copy that. So it just downloaded this zip file, and I can say unzip demo.zip, and it's going to extract that. So this is kind of my structure now. And as I have Maven installed, I can say Maven Spring Boot run, which will fire that up, hopefully. As this is like a new container, there is no Maven cache, so it has to download the entire internet real quick. But it will eventually get there, like now. And it will tell us, okay, your application is running on port 8080, and you can say open in browser or make public. You also have that option if you switch to that ports tab. So here you can see the running processes. This is running on port 8080. And if I open up that web page, it's going to point to that address. Now that I don't have any code in there, of course, nothing is going to work. But if I say, for example, actuator, then it's going to give me the actuator endpoints. So the application is up and running, and I could potentially use that URL and pass it on to you so everybody could look into that. All right. Now, at this point, there's probably no Java support yet. So if I go into, and now it tells me, okay, it has detected Java. If I want to install that language extension, I say yes. So now it's going to add the Java support. It will hopefully detect this is a Maven project, and so on. So at this very initial point, it will most likely not be able to, I'm going to accept it. So it doesn't resolve like a REST controller, for example. This will take until the Java extension has been activated. These are things you need to do only once. Normally, you can also pre-configure that container and say, these are the Visual Studio Code extensions that I want to have. These are the kind of runtimes that I want to have included, and so on. So I just wanted to show you how it works in a very vanilla kind of version. All right. So we'll leave it with that for the moment. Yeah, maybe I show one more thing. So if we're back here and we now open that Codespace part again and refresh that, it should hopefully say, okay, now there is one Codespace on that branch. I could potentially open as many as I want, and they would all point to the same branch. Of course, you must take care of your Git story then. And what I can do other things as well. So by default, it will start the Codespace in a browser mode. You could also say, I want to start this in Visual Studio Code. So it's going to detect if I have a Visual Studio Code running. No, I don't want, oh no, I'm going to update later. And again, you can see here on the bottom, opening remote. And it's now connected to that code space. So you can see this is exactly the same one that I had just now. This one activates Java straight away because I have this installed on my local environment. So if I start a new terminal here, I kind of get the same prompt. And if I say, for example, touch from VS Code, I have this new file in there. And if I switch to the browser, where did it go? No, this was the wrong one. Probably have too many windows open. Here it was. I can see that file here as well. So they're actually pointing to the same container instance at the same point in time. I could also here basically open a new session here and say, okay, touch from browser. And then I would certainly get to see that in here as well. So this just got added. All right, and that kind of makes it pretty easy to collaborate. I mean, if multiple instances point to the same container instance, you of course have the problems that you're stepping on each other's toes. This is something I would not recommend. I just wanted to show you that this is actually happening live. And you have various ways to access that. In the real world, I would of course recommend and say, okay, potentially everyone gets his own branch, then has a code space connected to it, does the development, and then follow the standard kind of development processes. All right. Another thing you can do that you might have seen, sorry for this jumping around here. You can open that also in JetBrains IDE. So what you need is that so-called JetBrains gateway. This is still in a beta state. I already have that installed. And when you open that, if you did it the first time, you basically need to set up this GitHub Codespace extension. This is what I have already done. But then it will kind of connect to my GitHub account and say, these are the code spaces that I have. So you see I have a couple of others, but this is the one that just created, which is basically running live. And I can say I want to connect this to my IntelliJ IDEA and run this connect thing. So it's just going to prepare it. This normally takes a bit of time to set up because it needs to download some client packages. I haven't figured out yet why this always needs to be the case. But it's in beta, so I can't really complain. Good. This is kind of the architecture, how that works under the hood. As GitHub kind of belongs to Azure, it's hosted most likely in the Azure cloud, running on some VM there, where this container is basically being started. So the container contains the source code of the Git repo, the various language runtimes, and the various toolings. And on the other side, from a client perspective, we can connect to it to Visual Studio Code, either in browser or desktop version, using JetBrains IDs, or also from the command line. So this works pretty well from my experience. Now, if you do it the first time, this is something you did not see today, that you have to grant your local Visual Studio Code the permissions to actually connect to the things. This has already happened in my case. So that's kind of the support matrix to say if you run the things in that way, you have various IDEs that you can connect to. You have, as Git provider, basically GitHub and only GitHub, because it's a GitHub kind of tooling. And from a cloud perspective, you don't really have an option. I mean, in the end, you're not going to see it, and you shouldn't worry about it anyways. OK, so this one is stealing my focus now. That means it has hopefully loaded. Well, it's still loading. I can go and continue here. Now, Gitpod is kind of similar to what we've seen with Codespaces, but it has a kind of a different pitch. I mean, Codespaces is only one of many GitHub offerings. Gitpod is basically the business of the company is that cloud-based development environments. So if you go look on their website, they basically predict. Oh, somebody is calling me here. Aha, JetBrains is saying both client and ID backend will be restarted. Well, okay, I have 30 minutes left, so eventually you might be able to see that. Now going back here, yeah, so they kind of predict that, and of course they have to predict because that's their business, that this is basically on the rise at the moment and potentially tying in with generative AI things. So it's not, it hasn't reached a peak level yet, but it's continuously picking up. And they are not providing an own Git repo service. So they basically say, okay, you need a GitHub or a GitLab or let's say a Bitbucket instance. So these are the Git providers they're going to work with. These are basically the IDEs and editors that you can connect to it. And you also have a selection. Hello again. Yeah, I should probably be fair and say normally it doesn't take that long. But this is the first time I set this up with that new repo. And so if you have seen IntelliJ before, this is probably a panel that you have not seen. So this basically gives a backend status of the container which is running. So it normally, especially in the beginning, it complains that there's very high CPU load and it's not operational. And yeah, if you run it with using IntelliJ, it needs a bit more resources. So those container instance you can configure. If you just click start, the way I did it before, it takes a default configuration. But you can also take a more powerful configuration, which in turn means you have basically less free credit. Normally, this levels out after a while when the thing is started. And then, yeah, again, this points to the same repo. We can basically see here are the files that I started before. And I could also go and run the things from here. So if I say, yeah, touch from IntelliJ, we will be able to see that in the other ones as well. So this just got added here. So this works from all directions. I mean, this IntelliJ I would still have to configure. So it says it's, okay, what does that all mean? I accept. Okay, if you don't want it, I don't accept it. Don't ask again. I mean, anyway, I'm not going to do an IntelliJ demo here. The next thing would probably have to be that you have to specify which kind of, you have to configure your Java runtime, because it cannot use like the ones that it's normally configured with, because they're on my local machine. So now I would have to point to the JDK, which is basically inside of that container. But it's no problem doing that. All right, back to the story here. So with Gitpod, you are independent in kind of a way from your Git provider. So you can do that with all of the major ones. So let me show that too. If you go, there are various ways to actually get there. If I go on Gitpod.io, this is the way how it looks like when you are already logged in. If you log out and start here, so I get try for free, then it's going to ask which provider it should actually connect to. So you can't be connected to the two ones at the same time, and like not at least in the same browser session. So I'm going to say I'm going to connect with GitHub. Then it's going to list my already existing workspaces. So I have some active ones, I have some inactive ones. Here you can see, I think these are the ones from some of my students. So they can send me their GitHub link, and I can just open up a workspace here, and it's never going to mess up with anything on my machine, and it's never going to mess up anything with their code, as long as I don't start committing things. Yeah, so I can say I want a new workspace, and I potentially have to fill in a GitHub URL. With that browser extension that I showed you before, I can also do that from here. So I can say open or open with options, and then it will start up a Gitpod instance. This also takes a couple of seconds, but from a look and feel, they are kind of identical. So you're going to see now, of course, if we start that, all that new files that I had just added before from the various other clients, you're not able to see in here yet. You're not even able to see the code. The reason is I haven't pushed it. So I probably have to go in here and say, okay, first draft, whatever, meaningful Git messages. And yeah, do that. Yes, please. So now it's all committed and pushed. And if I go into that workspace now, it's probably going to tell me that, yeah, I'm pulling them now, and now they're in sync. So these are, within Gitpod and Codespace, of course, there are two different instances pointing to the same repo. This is a way for a cleaner kind of development workflow. So everybody can potentially pick their own way of doing that. And this is basically where we are. Now, they, of course, start with an own kind of base image, which is different from the one that Codespaces use. So if I open up a new shell and say Java minus version here, it says OpenJDK 11. So if there's anyone from Gitpod listening, it would be a good time now to update your standard image to a newer Java version. Apart from that, of course, things work pretty much the same. All right. Any questions up to that point? Okay. So then we're going to move on, and I'm going to show you Devpod. This is kind of different from an architectural perspective. So if you go on their website, and I mean this screenshot is like a couple of weeks old, maybe it has changed, you see kind of a clear pitch. So it says Codespaces, but different. So this one is open source, this one is client only and unopinionated. And this client only is a very important thing. So this is not like a cloud service that you can consume and log into it, making things independent from your own device. This is actually a client app that kind of turns yourself into a provider of such a cloud-based environment or a container-based environment. I'm going to show you this. So you need to download that application. I have done this. That's kind of what it looks like. I'm going to come to that in a second. Too many windows open now. And yeah, you're looking at the support matrix, you kind of see what they are kind of pointing to. So they got also plenty of IDEs. They also say pretty much Git, everything which is kind of Git, they will support. That doesn't only mean like cloud providers that provide Git services. You could either point it like to a local directory, which is Git initialized. In turn, they have a high flexibility on the provider side. But this is something that you need to give. So you can basically say, I can say, I want to fire up an environment which uses my local Docker daemon, or that uses a VM which I have SSH access to, or I can point it to a Kubernetes cluster which is running somewhere. So the way that works, you install this as a client app, and then you pick a certain kind of provider. And as I said, this could be your local Docker daemon, VMs, Kubernetes clusters, and all of the other services that I had shown before. And from there, those environments will then be started. So I can show you this if I find that window again. So yeah, these are the two that I had already configured before. So obviously, I've done a similar demo at JavaLand a while ago. So here are the providers. So I have 3 providers in here. This Docker one is my local Docker daemon, which I should probably update as well. I have a Kubernetes cluster running in Azure, and I have a VM running in Azure. So if I look into this, it's going to ask me, like, what is my Kubernetes config, and what is the Kubernetes context? So let me just quickly jump in here. So I'm going to say kubectx. I have a couple of Kubernetes contexts. So this is the one. Let me see if this is online. they're up and running, so I can potentially use that. Now, okay, I'm gonna have to sort my windows real quick. I'm gonna bring that to the front. This works. This is fine. And now I can say I want to create a new workspace. And here I have to enter my Git repo. So this can be a URL, but this could also point like to a local file system. So I'm going to say github.com. So the one that I have just created. And now I want to pick a provider. So I'm going to say use that Kubernetes one that we have just seen. And what do I want as an IDE? I can say, okay, use the local VS Code or use a browser. Let's like try the browser one. And I'm going to say create the workspace. So this will do its thing. What we can try to watch that, if I find my terminal again. So if I open K9s, this is like a command line kind of Kubernetes browser, so to say. And if I check my namespaces, I can see that there is a Devpod namespace here. And there's nothing happening yet, but there's going to be happening something soon, hopefully. So this will create a pod in Kubernetes. Now there it's coming in. So it says this is a devox UK pod. So it takes that container, the dev container specification, creates that image, pulls the code inside, and then after this has started, which will probably take a couple of seconds, so here you can basically see how it interacts with the Kubernetes cluster, so it brings that up. And once this is done, it will give me the URL in my browser to connect to that setting. I mean, this can be very helpful, for example, if you don't want the thing cloud-based, if you want this to run maybe on your private hardware, and you say, okay, I would like to create 10 same instances of an environment, for example, for teaching a class or so, you could give that out. And so it's still in the creating phase, which shouldn't take that long. Let's put that over here. So yeah, I mean, we can of course look into it. So it has to pull this container from the dev container base. Okay, it's running now, so it's up and running. So this will basically install the final things and then take away my focus after that and point me to that browser. So we can continue in our presentation, and this will basically connect to. What I could of course also do, I could say I want to create another one. I'm going to say, okay, I'm using the same thing, github.com. And this time I want to use my local Docker daemon as a target and say create the workspace. Then, okay, this is running, so I open a new tab. Sorry for the change in colors. So these are like the Kubernetes containers which are currently running, but in a while there will be a new one which Devpod will create. So this has to pull the image first. And this is probably going to take a while. The difference here to the other one, this time I have to pull this base image to my local machine. And now I'm suddenly relying on the local network again. When I use that Kubernetes cluster, of course, this is running somewhere in the cloud and it's pulling it from the cloud. And now it actually has started. So it jumps in here, opens up a browser window, and I'm ending up, hopefully, in a browser-based Visual Studio Code that points to that same repository. Give it a few seconds and take a quick sip here. I still got 50 minutes left, so it should be okay eventually. Yes?
How does that compare to the dev containers?
I'm about to come to that. Because it's a good question. I repeat it. The question was, how does it compare to dev containers? It basically is using dev containers. For those not familiar with dev containers, this would basically be my next thing in my slides if I ever find them again. Oh, I know what happened. This has... The new upcoming browser has stolen my presentation focus. So that's where I was. It's tricky. So in the meantime, this has started, just to tell you this would eventually work. And now the same mechanisms apply. So it's going to ask, do I want to install the extension pack and so on. But as you can see here, I have like a local host, which is kind of redirecting to my Devpod client, which will then point to the service running in the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, going back here. So this would have actually been my next topic. Now, I've only started things in a very vanilla way. Just letting the provider guess what my environments are looking like and what I'm going to use. But I can customize those things. So I'm going to start with an example in Gitpod first. So Gitpod has this concept called Gitpod YAML, where I could either say, I'm going to define which is the base image. This is basically the default base image that Gitpod uses. And then I can basically define tasks to be started, ports to be opened, and so on. But I can also say, I want to build my own Gitpod base container. So this is one I created. So in this one, for example, I installed the latest Java version, fuzzy file search, a few other things for the command line, using CSH as my default shell, and so on. So I am basically able to pre-configure my environment just on a standard container basis. Same thing is possible, but even more with the other two, because they're using the so-called dev container specification. This is something which I think originated out of Microsoft, but it's open source. A lot of people contribute to that. And with that, I have a different way to specify this container specification. So there's various base containers, like the one that has just been downloaded in the other sample. So this would be the standard configuration. But I could also go in and say, okay, I don't only want that. I want customizations for my VS Code. So I would also, or when you fire up, I want that Java pack extension and some of the development tools for Docker. So basically all available VS Code extensions you can put in there. Additionally, you can also put in features. So I say, okay, I would like to have a different base image, but which is potentially smaller. And I know I only need a Docker and potentially a Kubernetes environment there. So this will basically bring in a Minikube and already Helm and kubectl pre-configured. So you could actually have your mini Kubernetes development environment also in the cloud. So this kind of specification is supported by Codespaces and Devpod, which I like kind of more because it gives you more flexibility as opposed to the one with Gitpod, which is kind of a bit proprietary. Potentially, they will also go in that direction. So what that means, I can show that in two other examples. So on Friday, tomorrow, we're going to do, me and my colleague are going to do a mini lab in here about OpenTelemetry. And in that case, we had a similar scenario to say, how are we making sure that all of the participants are going to have the same setup? So into our training, we put that dev container specification and the Gitpod specification so that none of the participants would actually have to bring anything. This one is pretty simple. It uses a pre-built image and adding some Python and HTTP bin that we basically need in the lab. For the other one, we have that dev container specification. And you can see there, yeah, we're opening ports, we're adding VS Code extensions, and we basically say the base setup is actually not being done only in a single Docker file, but in a Docker compose file. So it's basically bringing up a couple of containers when you start the environment. We do that because we want to expose a web page with all the tutorial. We want to provide a dev container where the participants can work in, and we need some other components that we use in our exercises. So that means with dev container, you can not only compose that container image with that customization features, you can also point it to an existing image or even to an existing Docker Compose setup and still add this customization features. So it makes it more flexible, but it makes it also easier to create a bit of a mess in there. Anyways, if you do something like that, we could also point this to everyone and say, if you don't want to start it with a dev container specification, it's still good enough if you just start that Docker Compose file and you have the exact same setup for yourself. And so back to Leander's question, which came out of this context here. If I start a new workspace here, it basically also asks me if I have a dev container path. Normally, it looks inside of the workspace if there is a .dev container file, and it's going to use it then. If not, I can point it to like a default one, and it's going to pick it up from there then. Does this answer your question? Excellent. Good. Now, sorry for that confusion in here. Yeah, as I said, from a pricing model, this is basically was how it was at the point when I created that slides. If this is ever going to change, or if it already has changed, I don't know. So in Gitpod, you kind of have this kind of credits that will go away over time, and depending on how many powerful machines you use. Oh wow, this one has started too. So this was the other one that I started from my local Docker desktop. In the meantime, it has obviously downloaded that image. So if I look in here, I should basically be seeing that now. Yeah, this is the one that has just been started in my local Docker daemon. It took a bit of time because it had to download this dev container base image over the conference network. Yeah, so it's hard to lose focus with so many things open. I hope I haven't lost you yet. And yeah, this one again has taken my focus in the browser. So I was here, back into that. Yeah, you can select different size kind of machines, and depending on how extensively you use them, of course, your credits are going to go away. And also, I think if you go over that, the costs for that are not ultimately high. So it's definitely an alternative. Yeah, so DevOps has a bit of a Java focus, of course. Those things are kind of independent of any kind of language, but most of the base image come with a pre-installed SDK man, so you can easily use that to update your environments. You can, as I said, use all the Visual Studio Code settings. You can use it with Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ. Now this one, as I said before, it is only possible to connect to it through that gateway, which is still in a beta environment. And this also doesn't work with the community edition. So you need the ultimate edition to actually access that from an IntelliJ side. And then this is just the thing that I had shown before. You have that various options, basically those kind of providers, where you can connect to remote environments that your IntelliJ instance will work with. And yeah, this is then what it looks like. Okay, now one of the cool things is, of course, you have a proper shell. I think Gitpod, like Codespaces and Gitpod have some pre-configured shells in your environment. So you got fish, you got C shell, and you got bash. And you can, of course, easily extend it with like OhmyCSH or like fuzzy file finder to get your look and feels like on your local setup. So what I normally do, I have like a pre-configured history file that I download when I started, and then I have like auto-completion and all the things in this local terminal, and that can get you quite productive. Yeah, from the Docker side, of course, there's Docker installed. That means you can use Docker Compose, you can use build packs, You can use chip and all other build mechanisms to create your containers, just as you would in your normal environment. Okay, so why could this be helpful? I guess not everyone in here is teaching a distributed systems class at university, and this should not be the only use case for applying that. I mean, as I said before, especially it comes very handy for trainings and educational purposes, where you want to ensure that all of the participants have the same environment. At Novatech, we teach a lot of container and in particular Kubernetes classes. And in that scenario as well, we want to make sure that all of the participants have the same setup and we have an easy way to look into. In the past, we have done it in a way that everyone would get a dedicated VM to access, and then starting from that VM, they would connect to a cluster and work with that. Now, this one makes this a lot easier, especially as you could run the environment in that very same Kubernetes cluster. So it also has a lot less footprint than spinning up all the various VMs. Yeah, and with that, you can say, I'm going to generate one template of an environment using, for example, that devcontainer spec, and then making sure whoever accesses it gets the same setup. Also, and this is probably how I use it mostly, if you work on different things at the same time. I guess most of us have made that experience. If you do that all on the local machine, the various configurations will potentially interfere with each other. And that can create a mess on our machine, which we normally don't like. So in a normal case, if I'm working on a project, and this is my main project, I probably have that set up on my local machine. But I have a couple of others. I can easily, like, let's say, outsource them into like dev containers running somewhere else. Yeah, so there are actually 2 labs using this technology. As I said, tomorrow we have, this is the lab that a colleague and I provide for open telemetry, so feel free to come and join us there. And actually today at 11:20, like in the next slot, Lisa will do that LangChain for J in action. And this is what I saw here. So this is going to be the lab. And in here, she also had this setup to say, I want to open this in Gitpod. So you can see that people are picking up this technology. And also, yeah, this works with everything. So if I say, I want to play around with some kind of an open source project, which is available on GitHub, I can just fire this up in such an environment. And if I don't want it anymore, I'm basically just can throw it away. All right. I think with that, I'm coming to an end. So I have 3 minutes left. So before I open this round up for questions, I would first of all like to say thank you very much for listening. Anything somebody would like to know and ask? Yes, please.
Do you know if any companies are using this for full-time development, not just for training? Does it make commercial gains?
Well, I don't know which companies, but I know that companies do that. I mean, I know some people from Gitpod, and they have like they provide company licenses so that like full development teams use that on a constant basis. With Codespaces, I don't know. From my own company, I can't say we're using it on the full extent. So it's just adopting it. I mean, you will probably notice that if you have your local IntelliJ set up for Java development, it's probably hard to beat with something running in a browser based in a container. But it's definitely catching up a lot. So I see more and more jumping onto that. But I can't give you a precise example on that. Yes, please.
So let's say I'm running one of these. So I'm running this Gitpod.
Yeah.
And let's say I use the other one, the open source one.
The
It's running
Devpod?
Docker, the open source version.
Yeah, the Devpod?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question was, so if I run Docker run,
Yeah.
how does it do Docker in Docker?
Well, Docker and Docker, I mean, there are container images which provide Docker runtimes in a Docker container. So they just basically share technically, it's not a new container instance in a container instance. They basically share the same underlying runtime, but it's like the way that, I mean, this is out of scope from the devcontainer technology. So it's like, for example, you can also have kind, like Kubernetes in Docker, which uses kind of the same thing that spins up a cluster in a containerized environment. How it technically works exactly under the cover, I don't know. I just don't know. I know it's not like an additional nesting layer of daemon, like within a daemon. It's using the underlying daemon, but just has mechanisms to isolate the various containers from each other. So I can only say it works, but I don't know exactly from a like namespace isolation perspective how it's being implemented.